Well, two tragedies have ignited a debate in the nation over racism and racial profiling. Thousands have taken to the streets demanding justice for Trayvon Martin, an unarmed black teenager shot dead by a neighborhood watchman. Outrage also growing over the death of an Iraqi woman in California. She was beaten to death. A note reportedly left beside her that said, quote, "Go back to your own country." In the wake of these seemingly racially driven incidences, we ask, is racial profiling alive and well in America? I'm joined now by Max Blumenthal, journalist and writing fellow for the Nation Institute. Welcome to the show, Max. So while both of these stories are tragic, only one of them seems to be capturing the attention of the U.S. media, and that is the case of Trayvon Martin. Why isn't this case in California of the Iraqi woman nearly as talked about?
That's a good question, and I was following the Trayvon Martin case from the beginning after he was murdered by a vigilante outside near his home, and it was actually the 911 scripts of the calls that George Zimmerman, the vigilante killer, placed to the police, and the release of those calls several days later that led to this flurry of media coverage, this killing was confirmed as kind of a vigilante assassination. Now, the facts around Shaima Al-Awadi have not been confirmed yet, although it looks pretty clearly like a hate crime. This note, "Go back to your country, you terrorist," was found on her door a week before the killing, and then again it was found by her dead body. And another reason that we haven't seen so much outrage about her killing, although there's a lot of outrage online and in the Muslim community, is that Islamophobic rhetoric in the United States has been normalized at the highest levels of our political debate by people like Newt Gingrich, who headlined a protest against the construction of a mosque in downtown New York, by people like Rick Santorum, another top Republican presidential candidate, who in 2007 called for Muslims to be eradicated and evangelized in the United States. So we're seeing this kind of rhetoric. Islamophobia, according to a poll by Ohio State University, has reached an all-time high in the United States since the killing of Osama bin Laden, and it's at all-time highs among liberal Democrats. So it's been normalized, and whether or not this was, in fact, a hate crime committed by a right-wing extremist, people are likely to believe that it was, because they're just waiting for someone to actually act out the rhetoric they're hearing on Fox News and they're hearing from political candidates.
Now, we recently covered the story of the NYPD targeting Muslims, monitoring Muslim mosques, Muslim students, anyone simply based on the fact that they are Muslim, whether or not there is probable cause that they are related to any kind of terrorist activity. So this shows that police are now profiling people based on religion. So would you say that discrimination is now shifting toward the Muslim population?
Let's assume that a right-wing extremist killed Shaima Al-Awadi and compare it to the Trayvon Martin case. Then in both cases, you would have citizens mimicking to some degree the behavior of law enforcement officials. George Zimmerman was essentially a vigilante who was a wannabe cop, who was trying to carry out police duties in his neighborhood. And across the country, you have the FBI, federal law enforcement, using community relations with the Muslim community as a guise to monitor Muslims in their mosques, sending in informants, entrapping people and convicting them on basically bogus convictions. In New York, the NYPD is not only monitoring Muslims in New York, they're monitoring Muslims outside of New York. And according to a former official in the NYPD's so-called demographics unit, which is created specifically to monitor every area of Muslim life in New York, the NYPD intends to treat New York like the West Bank. That's according to a report in the Associated Press. So if they're treating New York like the West Bank, they're kind of encouraging citizens to see all Muslims as potential terrorists, as potential threats, and to act out. And we haven't concluded the investigation in El Cajon of the Al-Awadi killing. But if it turns out that this was a right-wing extremist, then this person was essentially acting out law enforcement duties in an extreme and violent fashion. But to some degree, the view of Al-Awadi as a terrorist has been legitimized by law enforcement and by the right-wing media.
interesting connection in Germany. News recently came out of Germany that the court there ruled that it's legal for police to stop and ID people based on their skin color. So this is an example of overt racial profiling. At that point, they're not even trying to hide it or deny it.
Right.
Would you say that the same thing happens here in the U.S., but it just is more covert?
There are thousands of what's called stop and frisk procedures in New York City where the NYPD stops young black males on the street, frisks them, and lets them go. Thousands of these cases have been documented in the past year, and the Occupy Wall Street movement has an Occupy the Hood offshoot, which is attempting to combat this practice and to seek more transparency around it. And they recently held a million hoodies for march for Trayvon Martin in Union Square in New York City, after which Fox News anchor Geraldo Rivera blamed Trayvon Martin's hoodie for his killing. And I've seen it in my own neighborhood. I live in Flatbush in Brooklyn. I see young black males stopped by undercover detectives all day, all the time, for the crime of being young black men. This often leads to arbitrary arrests. There are more black people in prison in the United States right now than there were in slavery in the South in 1850. So clearly, there is a racially inspired program of incarceration and profiling of American citizens.
But Max, many people would point to the fact that today we have a black president, and they use that as an example to say, hey, we have come a long way toward racial equality here in the U.S., yet we still see hate crimes. We still see that hate groups are on the rise. So what do you think? Are we, in fact, getting better in terms of racial equality, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if maybe Barack Obama has helped change the atmosphere, but he is, he's the leading president in deportations of undocumented migrants from Mexico who are basically productive residents of the United States. And that isn't really on the radar, on the media's radar. But if you compare his response to the Trayvon Martin killing to his response to the acquittal of the killers of Sean Bell, who was an unarmed young black man who was celebrating his birthday and was shot 50 times by New York police departments and by New York police officers, and they were acquitted. And Obama said, we simply need to respect this verdict. He was running for election at the time. He was preaching kind of a doctrine of post-racialism, that we're living in a post-racial society and it's time to elect me, and I won't threaten white people. That's basically what helped him get elected. Now that he's secure as president and he's likely to beat Mitt Romney or whoever wins the Republican presidential primary, he's able to say, that Trayvon Martin could have been my son. If I had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon Martin. And to make this powerful statement against racial profiling, for which he's being attacked by Republican candidates. On the other hand, it's worth noting that Barack Obama in his entire term has not visited a mosque in the United States once. He's visited a mosque in Indonesia, but not in the United States. And that's because he's overcompensating for the attacks by the Republicans, by the right-wing media, on him as a crypto-Muslim who is not a Christian. And that is troubling to me because he is not speaking out against Islamophobia or trying to change the atmosphere in that realm.
And certainly there are people today that are still convinced that he is somehow, they're still convinced somehow that President Obama is a Muslim. Max, nice talking to you. That was Max Blumenthal, journalist and writing fellow for the Nation Institute.
Thanks for having me.